She was 8 months pregnant when he handed her the divorce papers, not at a lawyer's office, not after a difficult conversation, at the kitchen counter, before she had finished her morning coffee. With the same tone he used to schedule quarterly reviews, he told her she would be fine. He told her she was practical. He told her she would land on her feet.
I see what you mean.
What Carter Hartwell did
legally
not
binding?
know, what he had
Everything
never
you need
bothered
is
to
right
find
here.
out in 5 years of marriage, was that his quiet, practical,
Victoria, what
ordinary
have you
wife
done?
had been sitting on a
I
$6.2
know
billion
who really
family
killed him.
empire the entire time.
It wasn't who we thought,
That the
Vicky.
woman he
It
was discarding
David.
like yesterday's newspaper was the sole heir to one of the largest industrial fortunes in the American South. That the prenup he was counting on to protect every asset he had ever built was written on the assumption that she had nothing. He assumed, he never asked, and that assumption was about to cost him everything. But here's the part of the story that most people miss. Victoria did not win because of her family's money. She won because of something she had been building quietly for years, something no trust fund can give you and no divorce settlement can take away. Stay with me, because what happens next will change the way you think about what you are actually worth and who gets to decide. Lesson statement. This story is not about revenge. It is about what happens when a woman finally stops apologizing for the full size of who she is, and the world has to make room. Meaning, if any part of Victoria's story felt familiar, if you have ever made yourself smaller for someone who did not deserve the full version of you, the initio bosses, then this story was made for you. And if it moved you, here is what I ask. Leave one word in the comments, just one word that describes how you felt when Carter finally understood what he had thrown away. I will read every single one. If you believe someone in your life needs to hear this story today, share it with them. No explanation needed. They will know why you sent it. And if you are new here, subscribe and hit the notification bell, because every story on this channel is built around one belief: that the quiet ones always have the best endings. You do not want to miss what comes next.
What would you do if the man you loved handed you divorce papers while you were 8 months pregnant and smiled while doing it? Not a guilty smile, not a sorry smile. The smile of a man who thought he was trading up, like he was returning a slightly disappointing purchase and already had the newer model picked out. My name is Victoria Hartwell, and the morning my husband handed me those papers was the morning I finally understood what I was worth. But first, I had to lose absolutely everything. I want you to understand what that morning looked like, because it matters. It was a Tuesday in October, Scottsdale, Arizona, where even autumn feels like someone left the oven on. I was 8 months pregnant, wearing one of Carter's old college sweatshirts because nothing else fit anymore, trying for the third morning in a row to hang a mobile over the nursery crib. Little wooden stars and crescent moons on pale yellow ribbon. It kept falling. The drywall anchor wasn't holding, the ribbon kept tangling, and I had finally decided, in the way that only extremely pregnant women can decide things, that I was going to duct tape the entire situation to the ceiling and call it intentional design. The coffee was brewing. NPR was on the radio, some story about a city council vote somewhere. The baby was doing what she did every morning around 7, which was practice what I was convinced would be a future career in professional soccer. Everything felt ordinary, safe, unremarkable. That was the last ordinary morning of my life. Carter came downstairs at 7:15, which was unusual. He was already fully dressed, not work casual. His best suit, the charcoal Armani he saved for board presentations and charity galas. He was holding a manila envelope. He placed it on the kitchen counter next to my coffee mug with the precision of a man who had rehearsed the gesture. Then he straightened his cuffs. I stared at the envelope. He said, and I will remember these exact words until the day I die. My attorney suggested we formalize things before the third trimester got any further. The coffee mug hit the floor. I did not throw it. My hand simply stopped working. The ceramic shattered on the Spanish tile, dark liquid spreading in every direction. And from the nursery down the hall came the soft thud of the mobile finally surrendering to gravity. Carter stepped around the broken mug carefully, avoiding the coffee stain with the practiced ease of a man who had always been very good at stepping around messes he created. I picked up the envelope with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else. Inside were 12 pages of legal language that meant one thing. He was done with me. I looked at him, he looked back, and I saw something I had never seen so clearly before. Carter Hartwell had already left. Not that morning, not recently. He had been gone for a long time, and I simply had not been paying the right kind of attention. "How long?" I said. He poured himself orange juice from the refrigerator, because apparently this was also the kind of morning where you had orange juice. "Victoria, let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be. How long have you been planning this?" He set the glass down, adjusted his tie. "A while." And Sloan. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, exactly, more like mild inconvenience at having the topic raised. Sloan Whitfield, 26 years old, 2 million Instagram followers. She posted motivational quotes over photographs of herself doing yoga at sunrise, and Carter had apparently decided this represented the kind of visionary partnership his life required. "Sloan understands my world," he said. "She understands what I'm building. You and I have wanted different things for a long time, and I think on some level you know that." I want you to hear what he said next, because it is the sentence I have thought about most in the years since that morning. He looked at me. 8 months pregnant, coffee on the floor, nursery mobile, fallen in the hallway. And he said, "You'll be fine, Victoria. You're practical. You'll land on your feet," said with the precise, warm condescension one uses to reassure a golden retriever being surrendered to a shelter. He took his orange juice, picked up his briefcase from the entryway, and left for work. I stood in my kitchen for a long time. The NPR story had moved on to something about interest rates. The baby kicked so hard I had to grab the counter, and from the hallway came the tiny sound of wooden stars and crescent moons swaying on the floor. Here's the first thing I learned that morning, and I want you to carry this with you. When someone tells you they need a partner who understands their world, what they mean is someone who never challenges them, someone who reflects their ambitions back to them like a mirror instead of engaging with them like a human being. That is not a partnership. That is an audience. And you deserve to be someone's partner, not their audience. I slid down the kitchen cabinet until I was sitting on the floor. My hand rested on my belly, where my daughter was still moving, insistent, alive. I did not cry right away. I was too stunned for tears. I was 8 months pregnant. My husband had just handed me divorce papers, and the nursery mobile was lying on the hallway floor. I sat there for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the microwave. Then I got up. I made fresh coffee. I called my best friend, and I started paying a very different kind of attention. Claire Donovan answered on the second ring, which meant she was already awake, which meant she had already seen something. Carter's assistant had a loose mouth on social media, and apparently the word was already quietly circulating in certain circles that Carter Hartwell was moving on. Claire had been watching and waiting, and had not called me because she was waiting for me to call her. She said, "I'm already packing. I'll be there by dinner. Do not sign anything." She drove 4 hours from Denver in a car that smelled like coffee and righteous fury, arrived at my front door with a rolling suitcase, a box of chocolate-glazed donuts, and zero patience for any part of this situation. Her first words, standing in my doorway, I drove 4 hours. I brought chocolate glazed. Talk. I talked. We sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours while Claire ate 2 donuts, took meticulous notes in a legal pad she produced from her bag, and asked me questions with the focused calm of someone who was professionally trained to find the weak points in arguments. Claire was a corporate attorney. She had spent 12 years identifying precisely where things were going to fall apart before they fell apart. At the 2-hour mark, she set down her pen. She looked at me over her reading glasses. Victoria, this prenup. She slid the document toward me and pointed at a section near the bottom of page 7. Did you actually read this clause when you signed it? I looked at where she was pointing. The clause read, in the event that either party has undisclosed assets, inheritance rights, or family financial connections exceeding $1 million in value, the terms of this agreement are rendered void and subject to full renegotiation under California Community Property Standards. The room went very quiet. Claire said carefully, what exactly did you tell Carter about your father's company? And that is where every decision I had made for 7 years, every careful omission, every deliberate distance I had kept between myself and the life I was born into, came rushing back like a tide. I told him, I said slowly, that my family was in manufacturing, that we were estranged, that I didn't want his money. Claire stared at me. Honey, she said, your family's manufacturing company employs 12,000 people. I need to tell you who I was before Carter, because the before matters as much as the after, maybe more. I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, in a house with 14 rooms, and a garden that my mother tended with the devotion other women gave to careers. My father, George Hartley Sr., had built Hartley Industrial Group from a single shipyard on the Cooper River into one of the largest maritime and infrastructure companies in the American Southeast. $6.2 billion in annual revenue. 12,000 employees across 9 states. His name was on 3 university buildings and a wing of the Charleston Hospital where I was born. Growing up a Hartley meant growing up understanding that you were, in some fundamental sense, a symbol before you were a person. Expectations arrived before you did in any room. People adjusted their faces when they learned your last name. They became warmer or more careful or subtly calculating, and you learned to watch for which one it was. I was 23 years old when I broke with my father entirely. He had arranged, and I use that word deliberately because it was arranged, not suggested, not proposed, a marriage between myself and the son of his primary business partner. A merger dressed in a wedding. I sat across from my father in his study, surrounded by his awards and his photographs and the portrait of my grandfather, who had started it all with nothing but a river and a vision, and I told him no. He told me I was choosing poverty over legacy. I told him I was choosing myself over a transaction. He froze my trust fund that afternoon. By evening, I had moved out of the family home. For 2 years, I used my mother's maiden name, Reeves. I took a curatorial position at the Scottsdale Museum of Art, learned to live on $40,000 a year, and discovered that a life without the Hartley name was quieter and smaller, and, in its own way, more honestly mine than anything that had come before. That was when I met Carter. He was at a museum benefit, charming and sharp-eyed, and genuinely interested in the Southwestern Modernist collection in a way that surprised me. We talked for 2 hours. He asked me about myself with the careful attention of someone who was actually listening. He knew me as Victoria Reeves, curatorial assistant, regular person, no particular pedigree. I told him on our 4th date that I'd had a falling out with my family, that they were in business, and that I preferred not to discuss it. He said he understood. He had his own complicated family history. He never pushed. I told myself that the omission was justified, that I needed to know he loved me before he knew about my family, that I was protecting something real and fragile. What I did not fully understand then, what I understand completely now, is that protection and avoidance look identical from the outside, and sometimes from the inside too. I was not just protecting our relationship. I was also protecting myself from ever having to find out if the relationship was real. Because if Carter knew about my family and still chose me, I would have to be fully present in that choice. I would have to believe it. I would have to stop waiting for him to leave. Here is what I know now, and what I want you to hear. Hiding yourself to find love is a bargain that cannot hold. You cannot build something lasting on an edited version of who you are. The foundation will always be missing the weight-bearing pieces. And the day will come, it always comes, when the structure collapses under the pressure of ordinary life. The collapse for me came on a Tuesday in October with a manila envelope and a broken coffee mug. Carter had missed my baby shower 6 months prior to attend a conference in Austin. The hotel records would later show he had taken Sloan. 4 months ago, I found a credit card statement with a jewelry purchase that I never received. $3,000 at a jeweler in Scottsdale's Fashion District. When I asked, Carter said it was a client gift. 2 months ago, I told him I was worried about us, that something felt wrong. I used those exact words, something feels wrong. He said, "You're just hormonal, babe." I want to pause here and speak directly to you, because this matters. If you raise a valid concern about your relationship and the person you're with calls it hormonal, that is not a response. That is a dismissal. There's a fundamental difference between someone who disagrees with you and someone who erases you. Disagreement is human. Erasure is a choice. Learn to tell the difference. And learn to take it seriously when you see it. Claire had found all of this in the hours since she arrived. She had her laptop open on the kitchen table, she had finished 4 donuts, and she was reading credit card statements with the focused expression of a woman building a federal case. "Victoria," she said without looking up, "his company, Hartwell Ventures. Do you know what his actual revenue numbers are?" He told me 8 million last year, said they were growing fast. He told his Series B investors 14 million. I stared at her. He told a different venture firm 11.3 million. Claire turned her laptop screen toward me. These numbers are not the same numbers, Vic. Not close to the same numbers, different. These are 3 completely different stories. I looked at the figures on the screen. I thought about Carter at his desk at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday, tie loosened, working late, asking me not to bother him with dinner because he was in the middle of something important. I had brought him dinner anyway. Left it on the corner of his desk without interrupting. He had not looked up. He wrote off Sloan's entire influencer lifestyle as marketing consultancy fees, Claire continued. Her Pilates membership, her car lease, 2 vacations, a furniture purchase. She paused. Victoria, he wrote off her Pilates membership as a business expense. I looked at her. Was she doing very strategic Pilates? Claire's mouth twitched. Apparently the most strategically important Pilates in Scottsdale. We both laughed. It was the specific kind of laughter that exists right at the border of tears. Sharp and a little wild and absolutely necessary. Sometimes humor is the only bridge between the person you were an hour ago and the person you are going to have to become. That evening, after Claire had ordered Thai food and we had eaten at the kitchen table surrounded by legal documents, she set down her chopsticks and looked at me with the expression she reserved for moments that mattered. Vic, the prenup clause. You know what it means. It means the prenup is void if I disclose my family background. It means the prenup was void the moment you signed it, if the undisclosed assets already existed, which they did. She paused. Your trust fund, your inheritance rights, all of it. The prenup he's counting on to limit your settlement. It might not be worth the paper it's printed on. I was quiet for a long moment. I haven't spoken to my father in 7 years, Claire. I know. I don't know if he'd even want to hear from me. I know that too. She met my eyes. But you're about to have a daughter, and she deserves every weapon in your arsenal. The baby moved. A long, slow roll, the kind she did when she was settling in for the night. I picked up my phone. I did not call my father. My father and I had never been good at first steps toward each other. We were too similar, both too proud, both too convinced of our own rightness, both absolutely terrible at apology. I called my grandmother instead. Margaret Reeves was 71 years old, a retired federal judge from the Fourth Circuit, and the sharpest human being I had ever met in my life. She lived in a Victorian house in Charleston's Ansonboro neighborhood, with 3 cats she had named after Supreme Court justices, Ruth, Sandra, and Sonia. And the kind of moral clarity that comes from spending 30 years watching people lie under oath. She answered the phone mid-sentence, apparently in active argument with one of the cats about throw pillow placement. Victoria, sweetheart, hold on. Ruth, I swear to God, if you knock that off the end table one more time. Sorry, honey, I'm here. What's wrong? Carter served me with divorce papers this morning. The cat argument stopped. Silence. Then, in the voice she had used to issue rulings from the federal bench, he served you with papers while you were 8 months along. Yes. In the morning. Before I'd finished my coffee. Another pause. Shorter this time. I'll be in Scottsdale by dinner. Make sure there's sweet tea. She arrived at 7:15 p.m. in a car driven by her longtime assistant, wearing a cream-colored blazer and the expression of a woman who had prepared for this specific conversation approximately 7 years ago and had simply been waiting. She brought Daniel Whitmore with her. Daniel was 63, silver-haired, soft-spoken, and the Hartley family's senior attorney for over 2 decades. He carried a leather briefcase that had seen more significant legal battles than most courtrooms. He set the briefcase on my kitchen table and opened it with the quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly what was inside. Victoria, he said, there are several things you need to know. While I was sitting at my kitchen table, learning the shape of my own life, Sloane Whitfield was standing in front of her bathroom mirror in her Scottsdale apartment, planning her announcement. She had spent 45 minutes on the photograph. Natural light from the window, her best white linen blouse, hair down the way her followers preferred. She looked effortless. She looked happy. She looked like a woman at the beginning of something wonderful. The caption she chose, after 6 drafts. Sometimes, love finds you when you least expect it. A small white heart emoji. Nothing more. She posted it at 9:15 a.m. and set her phone face down on the counter while she made green tea. By the time she picked the phone back up 20 minutes later, the post had 42,000 likes. Her manager, a brisk woman named Diane, who operated on 4 hours of sleep and pure adrenaline, called within the hour. Sloane, the Carter Hartwell post. Are you actually with him? Officially? We're official, yes. Do you know what his net worth is? Sloane laughed. Diane, I'm not with him because of his... Do you know? Sloane paused. She and Carter had talked about his company, about his ambitions, about the Series B round he was closing. He talked about money with the casual confidence of someone who had always had enough of it. She had assumed comfortable, successful. She had not actually run the numbers. "Hold on," she said. She typed his name into a search engine. The first result was a Forbes profile from 2 years prior. She read the estimated net worth figure. Then she read it again. Her green tea went cold on the counter. "Diane," she said carefully, "I know. I thought he was just a nice guy with a good car. He has 4 good cars, Sloan. 4. And real estate in 2 states." Diane's voice had acquired the focused energy of someone recalculating an entire strategic plan in real time. "This changes everything. A relationship with someone at his level. The brand partnerships alone would be worth—" "Diane." Sloane's voice was quieter now. "His wife. They have a baby coming." "And there's Sean." "The wife is filing for divorce. Or he's filing. The point is, he told me they'd been separated for a year, that it was mutual, that she was handling it fine." Brief silence on the line. "Is that what he said?" "Yes." "Okay." Diane's voice had shifted slightly, something careful moving underneath the professional efficiency. "Sloan, I'm sure that's true. But listen, do your research before you post anything else. Just to be thorough." After they hung up, Sloan stood at her window for a long time, looking at the Scottsdale skyline in the clear October morning. She thought about the first time she met Carter at an industry event 8 months ago. How he had seemed so genuinely interested in her work, her ideas, her life, how he had never made her feel like a trophy. She thought about the things he had said about his wife. Practical, content with small things, not a match for where he was going. She opened her laptop and typed Victoria Hartwell, Scottsdale, Arizona. The results were thin. A museum staff page, a brief mention in a benefit program, nothing significant. She tried. Victoria Reeves, Charleston, South Carolina. She found a society page photograph from 11 years ago. A young woman at a charity gala, dark-haired, elegant, standing beside an older man in a tuxedo. The caption read, "George Hartley Sr. and daughter Victoria at the Hartley Industrial Foundation benefit." Sloan stared at the photograph. Then she typed, "Hartley Industrial Group." The Wikipedia entry loaded. Revenue figures, employee count, subsidiary companies. The history of the company, dating back to a single shipyard on the Cooper River. Sloan read for a very long time. Carter had told her Victoria was nobody. A curator, a woman content with small things, with no ambition, with no understanding of the world he was building. Carter had not mentioned, had very specifically not mentioned, that his wife was the daughter of George Hartley Sr. Sloan closed her laptop. She sat with this information for a while, the way you sit with something that changes the shape of everything you thought you understood. Then she did something that would not fully reveal its significance until much later. She opened a new file on her phone's voice memo app, titled it with the date and a single word, documentation, and began to record herself describing everything Carter had told her about his marriage, his wife, and his financial situation in as much detail as she could remember. She had grown up in a small town in eastern Tennessee, the daughter of a man who had lost everything twice, once to bad business partners and once to his own carelessness about documentation. She had learned very young that the truth without evidence is just a story, and that the people who write things down are the ones who get to tell what really happened. She did not know yet exactly what she was documenting for. She only knew that something did not add up. And in her experience, things that did not add up had a way of eventually demanding a reckoning. She pressed record and began to speak. Daniel Whitmore had been the Hartley family attorney for 22 years. He had guided my father through hostile takeover attempts, labor negotiations, environmental compliance battles, and at least one situation I was not fully briefed on, that apparently involved a shipping contract, 3 congressmen, and a very aggressive federal mediator. He was not a man given to drama, which is why, when he opened his briefcase and said, "There are several things you need to know," and his voice carried the specific gravity of someone about to change everything, I felt the hair on my arms stand up. "Your father had a cardiac event 14 months ago," he said. The kitchen felt suddenly smaller. "He's recovered," Daniel continued quickly. "He's in cardiac rehab now, mobile, cogent, working reduced hours. But the event was significant, and it prompted certain revisions to his estate planning." He placed a document on the table. My grandmother, seated to his left, watched me with the careful expression of someone who has been waiting for a specific reaction and wants to observe it clearly. I looked at the document. "He reinstated your trust fund," Daniel said, "with 7 years of compound interest on the original $40 million principal." I looked at the number at the bottom of the page. I will not repeat it here. I will only tell you that it was substantially larger than $40 million. "Read the second page," my grandmother said. The second page was a summary of a revised will, executed 14 months ago, witnessed, notarized, and filed with the county clerk in Charleston. It was dense with legal language, but the operative paragraph was clear enough. Victoria Catherine Hartley, primary heir and successor to Hartley Industrial Group, controlling interest, full succession rights. I read it twice. Then I set the page down on the table with very careful hands. "He couldn't just call me," I said. "He couldn't just call and say he was sorry." My grandmother's expression softened by approximately 2 degrees, which for Margaret Reeves was the equivalent of a standing ovation. "Your father has never done anything like a normal person," she said. "It's a Hartley family tradition." "What did he say? When he made these changes, what exactly did he say about me?" Daniel cleared his throat. He said, and I'm quoting from his recorded statement at the time of execution, "She was the only one who ever stood up to me. She's the only one who can run it." The 3 of us sat out in silence for a moment. Outside, Scottsdale was doing what Scottsdale does in October. Golden and warm and indifferent to human drama. A neighbor's sprinkler system clicked on somewhere down the street. The baby moved, a slow, deliberate shift that felt like settling. Claire, who had been sitting across the table with the disciplined stillness of someone physically restraining herself from commenting, finally spoke. "Daniel," she said carefully. "The prenup clause, page 7. Daniel looked at her. "You found it?" "I found it. Yes." He pulled another document from his briefcase. "The undisclosed assets clause renders the prenup void from the date of signing. Carter's entire legal strategy. The settlement limits, the asset protection provisions, all of it, is built on a document that may have no legal standing whatsoever." I thought about Carter at the kitchen counter that morning, the careful way he placed the envelope. His absolute certainty that he held all the cards. I thought about him saying, "You'll be fine, you're practical, you'll land on your feet." Something shifted in my chest. Not anger, exactly. Something quieter and more purposeful than anger. The feeling of a door swinging open into a room you forgot you owned. "There's more," Daniel said. He placed a third document on the table. This one was a corporate structure diagram, dense with subsidiary names and investment vehicle labels and ownership percentages. Hartley Industrial Group has been acquiring shares in Hartwell Ventures for approximately 18 months, he said, through several shell investment firms and holding companies, none of which are traceable to the Hartley name without significant investigation. He pointed to a figure at the bottom of the diagram. Current ownership, 38%, not majority, but enough to be the single largest external shareholder in my husband's company. Carter has no idea, Daniel said. None of the investment vehicles carry any identifying information. To him, they're simply institutional investors. Claire made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a gasp. Something in between, the sound of a person watching pieces fall into an architecture they had not anticipated. I looked at my grandmother. You knew. You've known about Carter all along. I knew the kind of man he was, Margaret said. Within 6 months of your engagement, I had a fairly complete picture of his character. Your father authorized the share acquisitions as a protective measure, in the event things went wrong. You were building a safety net. I was building leverage. She corrected me without apology. There is a difference, Victoria. A safety net catches you when you fall. Leverage prevents other people from pushing. Here's what I want you to understand about this moment. I felt two things simultaneously, and they were not compatible with each other, and I think that is important to acknowledge. I felt the warm, profound relief of not being alone in this, of discovering that people who loved me had been quietly building walls around me while I thought I was standing unprotected. And I also felt, beneath that relief, a quieter and more complicated emotion, because they had done this for me without telling me. And part of me wondered how different the last 7 years might have looked if I had known. If I had not been carrying the full weight of aloneness, thinking I had nothing, thinking I had walked away from everything. Sometimes the people who love you protect you in ways that also, accidentally, continue the isolation, not out of cruelty, out of a kind of care that doesn't know how to ask what you actually need. I think about that sometimes, even now. But that evening, sitting at my kitchen table, 8 months pregnant, with 48 hours between me and the worst morning of my life, what I felt most was this. I was not going to fight this battle the way Carter expected. I was not going to beg or collapse or negotiate from desperation. I was going to fight it as Victoria Hartley. The name I had set down at 23 and had not picked back up in 7 years felt different now. Not a cage, not a transaction, a tool, a history, a very long but lineage of people who had looked at impossible things and decided to build anyway. What is our first move? I asked Daniel. He almost smiled. Our first move is to make sure Carter understands who he's actually divorcing. I nodded. Outside, the October evening was cooling. Inside my kitchen, surrounded by legal documents and empty donut boxes, and the quiet, steady presence of the two women who had shaped me, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. I felt like myself. I will be honest with you about what happened next, because the honest version is more useful to you than a clean version. I thought we had him. The confrontation happened on a Thursday morning. Carter came to the house to collect more of his belongings. He was methodical about it, treating the dissolution of our marriage with the same project management efficiency he applied to quarterly reviews. He arrived with 2 rolling suitcases and a very organized list. I was in the kitchen. I was wearing my grandmother's pearls, not for beauty, as a signal to myself, a reminder of who I was standing there as. Carter came into the kitchen to get his espresso machine. He stopped when he saw me. I do not know exactly what he read in my expression, but something in it made him set down the suitcases. Victoria, he said, you seem different. I am different, I said. Carter, I need to tell you something about my family. I slid a single piece of paper across the kitchen counter. The Hartley Industrial Group Annual Report. Revenue figures, subsidiary listings, the Hartley name across the top in the company's distinctive serif font. I watched his face. The color left it in stages. First his cheeks, then his lips. Then, somewhere behind his eyes, the careful confidence simply went out like a light. You're You're a Hartley. His voice was very quiet. My father is George Hartley Sr. Yes. He stared at the document for a long moment. The prenup, he said. Page 7, yes? He looked up at me. How long have you known about the clause? About 48 hours. My attorney has known considerably longer. Something moved across his face then. Something I had not seen in 5 years of marriage. It looked remarkably like fear. Carter Hartwell, who was afraid of nothing, who had built a company from scratch through sheer belief in his own invulnerability, was afraid of me. I will not pretend I did not feel something at that. It would be dishonest to say I did not. He left without the espresso machine. He left without saying anything further. I watched his car back out of the driveway and felt, for the first time since Tuesday morning, something that was not grief or shock or exhaustion. I felt capable. I turned to Claire, who had been standing in the doorway. I think it's over, I said. She raised her coffee mug and a small toast. I genuinely thought that was it. I thought the look on Carter's face meant he understood. I thought the prenup collapse and the Hartley revelation would be sufficient. That Carter would call his attorney, recalibrate, and we would proceed to a settlement negotiation from a position of equilibrium. I was not safe. I was not even close to safe. 18 minutes after Carter's car left my driveway, Daniel's phone rang. I watched his expression change as he listened, watched it move from composed to carefully neutral in the way that experienced attorneys go neutral when they are preventing themselves from reacting visibly to something bad. He hung up and looked at me. Carter's attorney has filed an emergency motion, he said. They're claiming you committed fraud by concealing your identity and family wealth during the marriage. They're arguing it materially misrepresented the conditions of the prenup negotiation. Claire set down her coffee. That's retaliatory. Yes, but Judge Warren Phelps has granted a temporary asset freeze pending investigation. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. What assets? I heard myself ask. All of them. Daniel's voice was measured, precise. The voice of a man delivering news he has delivered before and still finds heavy. Your reinstated trust fund, your inheritance rights, the contested house, everything pending the fraud investigation. I looked at the Hartley Industrial Annual Report still on my kitchen counter. I looked at the figure of 7 years of compound interest on $40 million that had briefly, gloriously existed as a number I could access. I have $340 in my personal checking account, I said. Yes. I'm 8 months pregnant. Yes. And every cent of my money is frozen, temporarily. We'll challenge it immediately, but emergency freezes can take... How long? Weeks. Possibly longer if Phelps is inclined to be difficult. A pause. He and Carter are in the same golf club. I sat down very slowly on a kitchen stool. Here's the second thing I learned the hard way, and I need you to understand this one because it is practical and important. When someone powerful feels cornered, they do not surrender. They attack. They attack first, they attack hard, and they attack in the direction you least expected. You cannot celebrate a partial victory in a fight with someone who has more legal resources than conscience. Always have a backup plan for your backup plan. Always. I had won the first exchange. I had watched the color leave Carter's face and called it a conclusion. It was not a conclusion. It was a counter move. And I had not been ready for it. Claire, to her profound credit, did not say anything consoling. She opened her laptop and started researching emergency asset freeze challenges in Arizona, and she did it with the controlled fury of a woman converting despair directly into useful work. My grandmother made sweet tea. Sometimes that is all you can do. Make sweet tea and stay at the table. I am going to tell you about the worst 72 hours of my life in direct terms because I think you deserve the direct version. I think sometimes we soften the worst parts of our stories in the retelling. We cut away the moments of genuine helplessness because they feel they're too raw to share, or because we worry they undermine the strength of what came after. But the helplessness is the story. The falling apart is what makes the standing back up mean something. So, here's what happened. The first catastrophe arrived on a Friday morning in the form of a tabloid headline. Someone, I never fully confirmed who, though I have my suspicions about Carter's publicist, had tipped off a celebrity news website with a very specific narrative. The headline read, Tech entrepreneur Carter Hartwell and social media star Sloan Whitfield, love and bloom, while wife demands billions in divorce. The photograph accompanying the story was from a charity gala 6 months earlier. Carter and Sloan, looking beautiful and successful and entirely unconcerned. Sloan had posted the photo herself months ago in a different context. Someone had repurposed it. The story painted me not as an abandoned pregnant wife, but as a calculating heiress who had concealed her family's fortune throughout the marriage and was now using it as a weapon in divorce proceedings. The word entrapment appeared in the second paragraph. The phrase, long game, appeared 3 times. My phone began ringing within an hour. Journalists, people from Carter's social circle I had considered friends, a distant cousin, who had not spoken to me in 4 years, suddenly very interested in how I was doing. Not one of them called to ask if I needed anything. They called to ask if I had a statement. I watched the missed calls accumulate on my screen and felt something I had not anticipated. I felt invisible. I had spent 7 years making myself invisible by choice. Now I was invisible, against my will, replaced by a version of myself I did not recognize. A villain in a story where I had been the one sitting on the kitchen floor with a broken coffee mug and a baby kicking against my ribs. Don't respond to anything, Claire said firmly. Not a word, not a like on social media, nothing. I put my phone face down on the counter. That was Friday morning. Friday afternoon, my grandmother took a call from Daniel. I watched her listen, watched her face do the thing it did when she was absorbing difficult information. A kind of absolute stillness, like deep water. She hung up. Your father has had a second cardiac event, she said, less severe than the first. He's at Roper St. Francis. He's stable. I was on a flight to Charleston by 9 p.m. Claire booked it on her own credit card without being asked, without making a point of it, without saying anything about it at all. She simply handed me the confirmation email and started packing an overnight bag for herself. You're coming? I said. Obviously. On the plane, somewhere over the dark expanse of the American South, I looked out the window at the lights of cities I could not name and thought about my father. 70 years old, running his company since he was 35, never sick a day in his life until, suddenly twice in 14 months. I had spent 7 years being afraid of becoming him, afraid of the coldness, the control, the tendency to love people as assets rather than as people. I had run from that inheritance as hard as I had run from the financial one, and somewhere in those 7 years, while I was busy being afraid of turning into George Hartley, Sr., he had been sitting in a hospital bed rewriting his will. He had been making peace in the only language he knew how to use: numbers, documents, legal instruments. The only love letter George Hartley Sr. knew how to write was a corporate succession plan. I want you to hear this because it is the most important practical wisdom I carry from this entire year. Do not wait for the perfect moment to make peace with people you love. The perfect moment does not exist. It is an idea people use to avoid doing something frightening. The hospital waiting room is not a comfortable place to have the conversation you should have had years ago. Have the conversation now, while everyone is still standing, while there is still time to be ordinary together before extraordinary things start happening. We arrived in Charleston at 1 in the morning. I went directly to the hospital. My father was sleeping, sedated, stable, the monitors beside him steady and rhythmic. I stood in the doorway of his room for a long time, looking at the man who had shaped me by both example and opposition, who had given me the stubbornness and the standards and the capacity for strategic thinking that I would spend the next several months using in ways neither of us could have predicted. I did not go in. I stood in the doorway and said, quietly, the things I had been carrying for 7 years. He could not hear me. That was all right. Some conversations are for the speaker, not the listener. I was still standing in the hallway when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. My brother George Hartley Jr. was 41 years old, broad-shouldered, wearing an expensive coat and the expression of a man who had been waiting for this specific moment for a very long time. "Welcome home, Victoria," he said. His voice was pleasant. The pleasantness was a threat. George Jr. and I had never been close. We had been cordial. The careful cordiality of two people who both understood they were in competition for the same thing and had decided to manage it with surface politeness rather than open conflict. He had always resented our father's regard for me. He had spent 20 years proving himself in the company, building his own record of competence and loyalty, and he had watched our father reinstate my inheritance from a hospital bed without, apparently, the same consideration. "I've retained counsel," he said. "I'm contesting the will revision. The basis is undue influence and diminished capacity at the time of execution." I stared at him. "Dad was in outpatient cardiac rehab when he signed it, George. His judgment was impaired by medication and emotional distress following a major health event. My attorneys believe we have a strong case." I stood in a hospital corridor in Charleston at 1:15 in the morning, 8 months pregnant, $340 in my bank account, every other asset frozen by my estranged husband's attorneys, my father lying sedated in the room behind me, and my brother looked at me with the pleasant expression of a man holding a door closed against the cold. I slid down the corridor wall until I was sitting on the linoleum floor. I did not have a plan. I did not have a speech. I did not have the strategic clarity that the stories we tell about strong women always suggest they have in their lowest moments. I had nothing except the specific, particular exhaustion of a person who has absorbed 3 consecutive blows and does not yet know where the 4th is coming from. A nurse passed the corridor, stopped, looked at me without comment, and came back 30 seconds later with a paper cup of water and a small package of crackers from the nurse's station. She placed them beside me without a word. She did not ask what was wrong. She did not offer platitudes. She looked at me with the clear, steady gaze of someone who has seen people at their lowest and has learned that sometimes the only useful thing is water and crackers in the presence of another person who is not going anywhere. I have never forgotten her. I do not know her name, but I drank the water, I ate the crackers, and I decided, not dramatically, not with music, not with a sudden clarity that arrived like sunlight through a cloud, I simply decided, in the small and practical way that real decisions are actually made, that I was going to get up. Not because I had a plan yet, because my daughter needed me to. The next morning, I did something that felt, at the time, like the smallest possible action and turned out to be the most significant one. I asked everyone to leave the room. My grandmother, Daniel, Claire, I asked them to give me 1 hour alone in the small conference room the hospital had offered us. They exchanged a look. the particular look of people who want to argue and have decided not to, and they left. I sat at the table, alone with a legal pad and a pen. I did not make a plan. Not yet. I made a list. Everything I actually knew. Not what I had been told, not what others had prepared on my behalf, not the assets and legal strategies and corporate diagrams Daniel had laid out so carefully. Just what I knew, personally, specifically, from my own experience and my own expertise. I knew art, 12 years of training, 4 years of professional curatorial work. I knew provenance and authentication and market valuation in ways that very few people outside the field understood. I knew the 3 paintings in my Scottsdale living room. I had chosen every one of them. I knew where they came from, what I had paid for them, and exactly which funds I had used to purchase them. My personal salary, pre-marriage, clearly documented. I pulled out my phone and called Dr. Patricia Kane. Patricia had been my supervisor at the Scottsdale Museum of Art for 3 years. She was 62, meticulous, and had the kind of professional integrity that had made her the go-to authentication source for half the galleries in the Southwest. She answered immediately. "Victoria, I saw the news. Are you all right? I need to ask you something professional. The 3 paintings in my home. I need a formal authentication and market valuation, and I need documentation of the purchase records." Brief pause. "When do you need it?" "Today, if possible. I'll call the museum's registrar right now. You purchase those through the museum's staff acquisition program. It'll be in the system." Another pause. Shorter. "Victoria, those 3 together. You know what they're worth. $680,000, I said. I had them appraised 2 years ago. At a minimum. The market has moved. Could be higher. $680,000. Not frozen. Not contested. Legally, clearly, provably mine. Carter had listed the paintings on the asset disclosure as household decor, value undetermined. He had not thought them significant enough to investigate. He had not remembered that I was the one who chose them, who had studied their provenance, who had bought them with money I earned before he existed in my life. He forgot that expertise has value. He forgot what I knew. He forgot a lot of things about me. I called Claire next. "You're smiling," she said when she answered. "I can hear it." "The painting's in the living room." 2-second pause, then, "Victoria, are you telling me your entire emergency operating fund is hanging on your living room walls?" I always did have good taste. I heard her start laughing. Real laughter, delighted and relieved. And I felt the tightness in my chest loosen by a specific and measurable amount. An hour later, with Patricia's documentation confirmed and on its way, I turned to the second item on my list. The will contest. George Jr.'s argument rested on a single claim, that our father had been mentally compromised at the time he revised the will. Diminished capacity, undue influence, but the will had been executed on a specific date. I knew the date from Daniel's documents, and I had been looking at my father's medical records, the ones Margaret had preserved in a folder she had been keeping, apparently, since the first hospitalization. And I had noticed something. The notarization was dated, the witness signatures were dated, and the date was 4 days before my father's second hospitalization, 4 days before the cardiac episode that George Jr. was citing as evidence of his compromised state. At the time of signing, our father had been in outpatient cardiac rehab, mobile, conversational, participating in his own medical care. His physician's notes from that week described him as lucid, motivated, and cognitively intact. George Jr.'s entire legal theory required proving incapacity at a time when the medical record explicitly documented its absence. The case collapsed on the timeline, not on strategy, not on resources, not on courtroom maneuvering, on facts, on dates and documentation, and the simple, unglamorous reality that the truth, when you can find the specific evidence that confirms it, is an extremely effective weapon. I brought Daniel the relevant pages from the medical file with tabs marking the specific dates. He looked at the documentation, then he looked at me the way Patricia had looked at me on the phone. With the expression of someone who has known you for a long time and has just seen something they did not know was there. "Where did you find this?" he asked. "Grandmother kept copies of everything. She always has." "Victoria." He said my name with a weight it had not carried before in all our years of professional acquaintance. "Your brother's case has no foundation, I know." That afternoon, I requested a meeting with George Jr., just the two of us. Hospital conference room, no attorneys. He came because he was curious. He expected, I think, a negotiation, perhaps a tearful request for mercy, or an offer of financial concession. He had always interpreted my directness as aggression and my directness as emotion. He had never fully understood that they were neither. I placed the notarization timeline on the table. "The will was signed 4 days before the second hospitalization," I said. "Dad's physician notes from that week document full cognitive function. Your entire case rests on incapacity at a time when the medical record proves the opposite. If you pursue this, I will have you removed from every board position in Hartley Industries. Not because I'm angry at you, because you are willing to destroy our father's explicit and legal wishes to satisfy your own ego, and I will not allow that to happen to his legacy." George Jr. stared at the document. He stared at me. "You sound like him," he said. "I know," I said. "I used to think that was an insult." He withdrew the will contest by 4 o'clock that afternoon. I walked out of the hospital into the warm Charleston evening and stood on the sidewalk and breathed the salt air off the harbor and understood, perhaps for the first time completely, what my father had been trying to say with his will. She was the only one who ever stood up to me. He had not meant it as praise exactly. He had meant it as recognition, as the acknowledgement that the quality in me that had always infuriated him was also the quality that made me capable of protecting what he had built. He was not wrong. The asset freeze was lifted on a Monday. Daniel had argued successfully that Carter's fraud claim was retaliatory, procedurally improper, and unsupported by the actual legal facts. Since omitting family background is not fraud under Arizona family law, unless specifically asked and explicitly denied, Judge Phelps, faced with a motion from one of Charleston's most respected attorneys and a timeline that made Carter's claim look like what it was, reversed the freeze. That same week, 3 major venture capital firms quietly withdrew from Carter's Series B round. Hartley Industrial Group's stake in Hartwell Ventures had become known in the investment community. Carter's due diligence team had finally traced one of the shell companies back far enough to find a Hartley subsidiary. The investors had then, methodically, pulled every document Carter had given them and started cross-referencing the numbers. The revenue discrepancies were not subtle once you were looking for them. Carter called my phone 17 times on Tuesday evening. I watched each call come in on the screen. I answered none of them. Claire, beside me on the couch, had started a tally on a Post-it note. She was on her 3rd column. 17, she said. "I'm framing this. You are not framing that. It's going on my office wall. a monument to consequences. I laughed. I had been laughing more in the past 2 weeks than in the previous year, which tells you something about what the previous year had actually been. Wednesday evening, I allowed myself something I had not permitted since that Tuesday morning in October. I went into my grandmother's garden with a cup of chamomile tea and sat in the wrought iron chair by the magnolia tree and did absolutely nothing for 45 minutes. The October evening was cool, properly cool the way Charleston gets in autumn when the humidity finally relents. The garden smelled like late roses and turned earth. The baby was quiet, settled low, the way she had been for the past week, as if she too was conserving energy for what was coming. I thought, "We are going to be okay, baby girl. I promise." I sat with the certainty of it. Let it settle. I was not safe. My phone rang at 7:43 the next morning. Unknown number. I almost did not answer, but something. The specific quality of the ring, perhaps, or the hour, or some instinct that had been sharpening itself for weeks without my full awareness, made me pick up. "Is this Victoria Hartwell?" "Yes." "This is Sloane Whitfield." The garden was very still. A mourning dove was doing something in the magnolia. The tea was getting cold. "Victoria, I need to tell you something. I found something in Carter's apartment. Something about you, about a policy." Her voice was shaking in a specific way, not the shaking of performance, but the shaking of someone who has been holding something very heavy and has finally decided to set it down. "Carter took out a life insurance policy on you 14 months ago." The magnolia tree was still there. The garden was still there. The mourning was still happening around me in the ordinary way mournings happen. "How much?" I said. "4.2 million. And there's a beneficiary change form. It's dated 3 weeks ago." She stopped. "Then, he removed the baby. Victoria, he removed your baby as a beneficiary. The only name on the form is his." I sat with this information for 5 seconds. 10. The dove had gone somewhere. The garden was completely silent. "Are you somewhere safe?" I asked. Silence on her end. "Are you?" she asked back. "Here's what I need you to hear, and I need you to hear it very clearly, as a practical matter, and not as drama. Know what financial instruments exist in your name. Know your insurance policies. Know who your beneficiaries are. Know if any documents have been changed without your knowledge. Not because you are paranoid, because you are paying attention. Because paying attention to your own financial life is not suspicion. It is self-respect in document form. Check everything. Do it now. If you have not recently, do it as a regular practice. The way you check the locks on the doors. I had not checked. I had trusted. And trust is not a strategy. "Sloane," I said carefully, "I need you to not say anything to Carter. I need you to send me everything you know about this policy. The policy number, the date, the beneficiary form, and I need you to do it today." A pause, then, "I'll send everything I have. Victoria, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I thought—" Her voice broke slightly. "I thought he was just someone who had made a mistake in his marriage. I didn't understand what kind of man—" "I know," I said. "Send me everything." I did not panic. I want to be clear about this because I think there is a version of this story where the insurance policy revelation is the moment the protagonist unravels, and that would be the dramatic version. And it would be false. I had been building towards something for 3 weeks. I was not going to unravel 48 hours before I got there. I called Daniel. I called the Scottsdale Police Department. I called the FBI field office in Phoenix. The insurance policy, combined with the investor fraud documentation that Claire had been assembling for weeks, transformed the situation entirely. What had been a complex and ugly divorce with financial complications was now a federal matter. Insurance fraud, wire fraud, falsified financial disclosures to investors. Each one alone was serious. Together, they were the kind of case that federal prosecutors write press releases about. Carter was served with a federal investigation notice on a Tuesday morning. He was having breakfast. The agents came at 6 a.m. He was in his bathrobe. I know this because his building's front desk security notified his assistant, who told Claire, who told me, and Claire may have expressed a specific degree of satisfaction about the bathrobe detail that I will not reproduce here, but that I also will not pretend I did not feel. Carter's attorney called the investigation a misunderstanding. The FBI, in my experience of the following months, it treats the word misunderstanding with a very specific kind of patience. The Hartley Industrial Board convened an emergency session in Charleston 10 days later. I flew back from Scottsdale. 9 days from my due date, which everyone, including my obstetrician, had opinions about, and walked into my family's boardroom for the first time in 7 years. The room was everything I remembered. Mahogany table, leather chairs, the portrait of my grandfather beside the original shipyard blueprint he had worked from in 1962. My brother George Jr. was in the room. He did not meet my eyes, which was a significant improvement over our last interaction. I wore a charcoal blazer, my grandmother's pearls, my grandfather's watch, an old Longines that he had worn every working day of his adult life and that had been in my grandmother's keeping since he died. She had given it to me that morning without ceremony, just placed it in my palm and closed my fingers around it. I presented the case in full. The Hartley stake in Hartwell Ventures, the falsified investor documents, the insurance policy, the beneficiary change form, the financial irregularities in Hartwell Ventures' expense reporting. I proposed a full acquisition of Carter's remaining shares at distressed market value, calculated based on the actual revenue figures, not the inflated ones he had presented to investors. The number was considerably less than Carter had believed his company was worth. The board voted unanimously. My father watched via video call from his cardiac rehab room in Charleston. He did not say anything during the presentation. When the vote concluded, his face on the screen was the expression I had always associated with him when something met his standard. A kind of compressed satisfaction, a barely visible approval that was, from George Hartley Sr., the equivalent of a standing ovation. After the board members filed out, George Jr. remained. He stood near the door for a moment, and I let him stand there, and I waited. "For what it's worth," he said. His voice was not quite what it usually was. The competitive edge had gone out of it, leaving something that sounded more like a person talking than a position being held. "You ran that meeting better than Dad ever did." I looked at him. "Don't push it, George." Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile. Close. The following morning, Carter agreed to the meeting I had requested. His attorney came. Carter looked like a man who had spent 10 days understanding the specific and irreversible weight of his own decisions. He had lost weight. The expensive suit was unchanged, but the person inside it was not. He sat across from me and he said, "I never thought you'd actually fight back." "I know," I said. "That was your mistake." "Victoria." He stopped, tried again. "I told myself the story a certain way, that you were content, that you didn't need more, that I was doing both of us a favor by—" He stopped again. "By discarding me," I said. Not cruelly, just accurately. "Yes." I looked at him for a long moment. The man I had married 5 years ago, who had asked me careful questions at a museum benefit and listened to the answers, who had held my hand during a thunderstorm in our first apartment because he knew I did not like storms, who had become, by degrees so gradual I had not noticed the accumulation, someone I did not recognize on the morning I needed him most. Carter, I said, real love does not ask you to make yourself smaller to fit inside it. If someone only loves you when you're diminished, if the relationship only works when you're hiding pieces of yourself, that is not love. That is control with better lighting. I spent 5 years making myself smaller for you. I was very good at it, and I will never do it again for anyone. He was quiet. He signed the acquisition documents. He signed the custody agreement. Generous visitation, structured and clear, the product of 2 weeks of careful legal negotiation. He signed the divorce settlement, which reflected the actual terms that applied to the actual marriage between Victoria Hartwell and Victoria Hartley, not the fictional version he had constructed. As he was leaving, he stopped at the conference room door. "The baby," he said. Will I be allowed?" "You're her father," I said. "That doesn't change." He nodded, something in his face that was not quite relief, more like the first breath of a man who has been underwater and has finally surfaced. Then Sloane asked to see me. Carter had gone. His attorney had gone. Claire was in the hallway, presumably updating her post-it tally. Daniel was organizing documents with the satisfied efficiency of a man who had just concluded 30 years of professional experience in a single case. Sloane came into the room and sat down across from me and placed a small flash drive on the table between us. "I've been documenting everything for 8 months," she said. I stared at the flash drive. Every conversation, every lie he told me about you. I have voice recordings, text logs, screenshots of the financial discussions he had on calls he didn't know I was within earshot of. She paused. "I've been talking to the FBI for 3 months. The room was very quiet. "You were working with the FBI, I said. "Yes. For 3 months. I contacted them after I found the first investor document, the one with the 14 million revenue figure. I grew up in Tennessee, Victoria. My father lost everything twice to men who understood that the people with the least documentation always lose." She looked at the flash drive on the table. I knew what Carter was doing. I knew it early. I just didn't have enough yet, and I needed to be in a position where he trusted me completely. A pause. "I'm sorry it took as long as it did. I'm sorry for what those months cost you." I sat with this for a long time. Here's the truth. I had decided Sloane's story before I knew it. I had cast her as the villain of my narrative because it was the simplest available role, because it was the role the story seemed to require, because it made the whole terrible situation more legible if there was someone clear to be angry at. I had not considered that she might be a person with her own full interior life, her own history, her own reasons for every decision she had made. I had been dismissed by someone who decided my story before he knew it, and I had almost done the same thing to her. "I did not see this coming," I said. "I know." For the first time since she had entered the room, Sloane almost smiled. Neither did Carter. My daughter was born on a rainy Thursday morning in late October at Roper St. Francis Hospital in Charleston, South Carolina. In the same wing where, my grandmother informed me with characteristic precision, 4 other Hartley women had given birth over the past 60 years. She arrived at 11:47 p.m., announcing herself with a cry so emphatic and so clearly her own opinion of the whole situation that the delivery nurse laughed. She weighed 7 pounds and 2 ounces. She had my eyes, green, slightly skeptical, the eyes my grandmother said my grandfather had always described as the eyes of someone counting cards. I held her in the quiet after, in the specific silence that exists only in the hours between midnight and dawn in a hospital room, when the urgent activity has settled, and what remains is just the fact of a new person existing in the world. She studied my face with the ancient, focused attention of newborns, and I studied hers. "Hello," I said. "I'm your mother. I have been waiting a very long time to meet you." My grandmother was in the bedside chair. She had arrived at the hospital at 3 that afternoon and had not left, and no one had tried to make her leave, because making Margaret Reeves do anything she had decided not to do is an exercise in very specific futility. She looked at my daughter with an expression I had never seen on her face before, the expression of a woman who has spent 71 years being formidably composed and has encountered the one thing that dissolves formidable composure entirely. "She's a Hartley," Margaret said softly, "right down to the chin." "Don't say that in front of her yet," I said. "Let her develop some illusions first." Claire was asleep in the corner chair, fully dressed, a legal pad on her lap that she had apparently been reviewing until approximately 20 minutes prior. She was snoring gently and had a post-it note stuck to her sleeve that said, "Evidence. Do not lose." She had driven from Denver again. She had not been asked. Daniel arrived in this morning with coffee and the expression of a man who had been up all night handling things and was mildly pleased with how they had handled. He sat in the chair beside my bed and told me Carter had called the previous evening to ask about the birth. I had told Daniel, before going into labor, to tell Carter that I would contact him when I was ready. Carter had said, according to Daniel, "Tell her I understand, and tell her I meant what I said. I'm sorry." I looked at my daughter, asleep against my chest. "He can come," I said. "This week, when she's settled, he should meet her." Daniel nodded. Then he placed a small velvet box on the bed beside me. I looked at it, then I looked at him. "Daniel," I said, "we finalized my divorce 48 hours ago." "I know." He did not move to open the box. He let it sit there between us, present but not pressuring. "Victoria, I have loved you since you were 14 years old and spent an entire family dinner arguing contract law with 3 partners from my firm. I have watched you for 20 years. I have watched you leave and build something on your own terms and lose it and build it again and fight for yourself in ways that I think even you did not know you were capable of until you had no other choice." He paused. "I'm not asking because of the Hartley name. I never cared about the Hartley name. I'm asking because of you. The specific, particular, complicated, entirely remarkable you." I was quiet for a long moment. My daughter made a small sound in her sleep, a brief protest at something, resolved immediately, the sound of a person who is already confident the world will accommodate her. "What's her name?" Claire said, from the corner, without opening her eyes. I looked at my daughter. I had known the name for a long time, had been carrying it quietly through the last weeks, like something I was not ready to say aloud until I was certain. "Eleanor Rose Hartley," I said. "Eleanor, for my mother. Rose for the garden where I had made the first real decision that was entirely my own." "That's a good name," Claire said. She opened one eye. "Did he propose?" "I'm considering it." The box has been on the bed for 4 minutes. What is there to consider? My grandmother, from the bedside chair, said nothing. She simply looked at me with the expression of a woman who has already seen how this ends and is waiting for me to catch up. I picked up the box. I opened it. The ring inside was simple. A single diamond, round, elegant, the ring of a person who knows what they are doing and does not need to make a point about it. "Yes?" I said. "David, yes?" He smiled. It was not a complicated smile. It was the smile of a man who has been patient for 20 years and has just reached the end of the patience and found exactly what he expected. 1 year later, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Hartley Industrial Boardroom on the 14th floor in Charleston, watching the afternoon light move across the harbor where my great-grandfather had started it all with a single lease and a borrowed furnace. Eleanor was in a carrier against my chest, 8 months old, regarding the harbor with the same focused attention she brought to everything. She had opinions already. Strong ones, expressed with great clarity and some volume. I had been named Chief Strategy Officer of Hartley Industrial Group 3 months after Eleanor's birth. Not CEO. My father was still running the day-to-day with the stubborn vitality of a man who has twice been told to slow down and has interpreted this advice as a polite suggestion from people who do not fully understand the situation. But I was in the boardroom. I was in the room where the decisions were made. I had earned it in a way that no inheritance document could have given me. I had also insisted, as a condition of the role, on 3 structural changes: flexible scheduling for all employees with caregiving responsibilities, a formal mentorship program for women under 35 in management positions, and a board seat guaranteed for a woman under 40 to be elected by the non-executive staff. My father had looked at these conditions for a long time. Then he had said, "Your grandfather would have said no to all 3. "I know," I said. Another long pause. "I say yes to all 3, he said. We had not had the conversation I had rehearsed for 7 years. We had not, in the end, needed to. He had had a heart attack and rewritten his will. I had had a marriage collapse and rewritten myself. We had both arrived at the same place by extremely inconvenient routes, and we had decided, without saying so explicitly, to begin from here. He came to the hospital to meet Eleanor on her 3rd day. He stood in the doorway of my room the same way I had stood in the doorway of his, and he looked at his granddaughter with an expression I had only seen on his face twice before. Once when my mother left, and once when his father died. The expression of George Hartley Sr. encountering something larger than his capacity for control. "She looks like your mother," he said. "She does," I said. He came in. He sat in the chair. He held her for 45 minutes and did not say another word, and that was, between us, sufficient. Carter received a federal plea agreement the following spring. No prison time, full financial restitution, 5 years of probation, and a permanent bar from serving as an officer or director of any public company. He used his settlement funds, considerably diminished from what he had imagined they would be, to start a small consulting practice in Portland focused on sustainable supply chain practices. It was, from what I heard, genuinely useful work. He visited Eleanor once a month. He was a different person with her than he had been with me, more patient, more present, less performing. Perhaps some people need to lose everything before they can be fully in a room. I did not hold it against him. Eleanor deserved the version of her father that had arrived after the accounting. Sloan Whitfield launched a podcast in January. It was called Document Everything, which I found both on the nose and entirely appropriate. It was about financial literacy for women in their 20s and 30s, insurance policies, beneficiary designations, prenuptial agreements, credit reports, all the unglamorous paperwork that determines what happens to you when things go wrong. It hit the top 10 on Apple Podcasts in its first week. I was her guest in episode 12. We talked for 2 hours and covered, among other things, the specific insurance clause that had changed everything, the importance of knowing your own financial instruments, and what it feels like to discover that the person you assumed was your enemy was actually gathering evidence on your behalf for 3 months. She asked me, near the end of the episode, what I would tell someone who was in the place I had been, sitting on a kitchen floor with a broken mug and a pregnancy and the worst morning of their life just beginning. I thought about it for a long time. I would tell them, I said, that hiding yourself to find love is a bargain that cannot hold, not because hiding is wrong exactly. Sometimes we hide because we have been hurt, and that is human, and it makes sense. But you cannot build something lasting on an edited version of who you are. The foundation will always be missing the weight-bearing pieces. I paused, and I would tell them that the moment someone makes you feel like a liability for being fully yourself, that is the moment to pay very close attention. Not necessarily to leave, but to see clearly. Because the person who loves you while you are small does not always love you when you grow. And you are going to grow. That is not negotiable. Eleanor, in my arms in the recording studio, chose this moment to express a strong and well-articulated opinion about something. The sound engineer laughed, Sloan laughed, I laughed. And sometimes, I added, you grow on a specific timeline because your daughter needs you to, and she is very clear about the deadline. That evening, I drove home to the Hartley house on the harbor, the house where I had been born and where I had returned, where Eleanor slept in the nursery that used to be mine, where David was making dinner in the kitchen with the focused attention he brought to everything, where my grandmother's cats were engaged in their ongoing territorial dispute over the best end table. I stood in the nursery doorway and looked at my daughter asleep in her crib. Above her hung a mobile, wooden stars and crescent moons on pale yellow ribbon. Not the one that had fallen in the Scottsdale hallway on the worst morning of my life. A new one, bought here, hung here, in the house where I was supposed to have been all along. It had not fallen once. I thought about the morning everything shattered, about the specific quality of silence in a kitchen after a door closes, about $340 and a frozen trust fund, and a corridor floor in a Charleston hospital, about a nurse I would never find to thank, who had brought me water and crackers, and the simple human presence of someone who believed I was going to be okay. I had spent 7 years hiding who I was because I thought love required it. I had spent 1 year fighting for who I was because my daughter required it. Here is what I know now. You do not have to choose between being loved and being powerful. You do not have to choose between being safe and being fully yourself. You only have to find people brave enough to love all of you. Every edited out piece, every hidden history, every complicated corner, and be brave enough to walk away from the ones who cannot. The stars and moons turned slowly above Eleanor in the soft nursery light. She slept with her whole self, the way babies do, completely present, completely unguarded, the way we are all born, before the world teaches us the uses of concealment. I had learned them, and I had unlearned them, and I was just getting started. Editorial disclaimer. The story, characters, and events in this content are fictional and created for entertainment and emotional reflection purposes only. Any resemblance to real persons or situations is entirely coincidental. This content was researched, constructed, and manually edited by our team with the intention of delivering meaning, emotional value, and life lessons to every person who watches. We do not use automated generation without human review and creative direction. Every word was chosen deliberately. For you.